Hello, everybody. Hello, Tom.
Hi
We're
there.
so
Nice to
happy
meet
to
you.
have you. Hi, hi. We're so happy to have you here today. On behalf of White Publishing, I'm here to talk to Tom about the book we've just published, Tom's book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. In Polish, it's Ludzkie serce, kosmiczne serce. Sounds even more mysterious, right? So we're here today to talk about the book, but also to talk about Tom. So first things first, please tell us something about yourself so our readers will get to know you better.
I had a pretty usual growing up, and then I went to college and was pretty dissatisfied with the whole academic college scene. So I joined the Peace Corps and taught gardening in Africa for 2 years, even though I didn't know much about gardening, but I learned. And then I realized there was a different way of doing medicine than I had been taught. So I went to medical school, always with the idea of teaching people about food and trying to help them get healthy. And also, which is kind of my nature, questioning the essence of what I had learned or was being taught. And so I did that throughout my career. Went to medical school and family medicine, and then had a medical practice for 35 years, worked as an ER doctor, emergency room for a few years. And I just the whole time was questioning what I had been taught, whether it was true. So, for instance, I questioned whether the heart pumps the blood and blocked arteries cause heart attacks, and whether DNA is the basis of heredity, and whether cancer has anything to do with genetics, and whether DNA codes for proteins, and whether ribosomes are real, and then eventually whether viruses are real and contagion is real. And pretty much in every case, I learned that what I was taught was not the truth. And so I just kept going from one subject to another, and along the way, writing books about what I found.
Brilliant. So now just maybe tell us what's the book about, in few words, of course.
So, one of the things I learned was that the way to know things was not necessarily to find out what is true, but to start with the sort of conventional claim, I would use that word, and then try to understand whether that's true or not. So the claim about the heart, the function, is that the heart is a 1 pound approximately muscle. The thickest muscle is the left ventricle. And the function of the left ventricle is to circulate the blood around the body. That's what we're told. And that is the basis of modern cardiology. Interestingly, I thought that originated from a guy named William Harvey back in the 1600s. But it turns out, insofar as he was actually a real person, which I'm not sure, but he didn't actually say that. He said the blood moved on its own accord and that the heart was a regulator. So I think it was Descartes who basically said the heart is a machine and it functions as a mechanical pump. And so I spent the first part of this book trying to investigate whether that claim is true. And as anybody who's read the book, I think you will see that claim is clearly not true. The heart does not pump the blood around the body. And then, of course, comes the question, so how does the blood move? And I gave some thoughts as to what I think that the answer to that is.
For me, the book, it's beautifully bridges the field of cardiology, the spiritual world, and even therapy. And the way it works is that every single chapter is about all of them, in my opinion. They're just like, blending or mixed all together. So it's very holistic approach. Do you agree?
Yes, whatever holistic means. But I think it's about finding out what we're told, or in other words, the claim. And so the first part of the book is so the claim that the heart pushes the blood around the body is not true. And then, of course, as I said, you have to figure out what the heart is doing. The second claim, which is the basis of modern cardiology, is that the reason people have heart attacks is because they have blocked arteries. And that's why we put people on statin drugs or low-fat diets. That's why we do bypass surgery. That's why we put stents in. In the United States, there's approximately $50 billion worth of stents put into patients every year to unblock their arteries. So it seemed like reasonable to ask the question, is it true that blocked arteries are the primary or sole cause of heart attacks? And what I discovered is it's simply not true. And in fact, they're a minor, if any, if they even have anything to do with heart attacks. And, essentially what I'm doing in the book is laying out the case that what we've been told cannot possibly be true. And at the end of that, then of course you have to try to understand, so why do we have heart attacks? And if you understand actually why you have heart attacks, then you can do something about it. And that then leads to a more holistic approach, because it's not just a deposit in an artery. That's actually ridiculous. There's a whole lot more to it than that.
You wrote this book, but not only because of your work, but also your personal life, right? Health issues. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who get into questioning medicine, or so-called alternative medicine, have had a health crisis that stimulated them to look elsewhere because the normal approach wasn't working. In a way, I never really had that. I've mostly been healthy and mostly fine my whole life. As I say jokingly a little bit, my mother used to say, you need to go get regular exams. And I said to her, I do. I had my last exam in 1984 when I graduated medical school. And then my next one is scheduled for 2034. And then I have one in 2084. I made sure the 2034 was with an old guy, so he may die before I get there. And that is very regular. Every 50 years, I go in and get a checkup. And I don't think that's what she meant. But anyways, the only issue I ever had was I was born essentially with an anatomic issue around the rhythm of my heart, which has nothing to do with pumping or blocked arteries. It's essentially, we have an electrical system in the heart, and there's essentially like a wire that runs from the SA node to the ventricles. And I was born with a second wire. So when it goes on the first wire, it's normal, and it goes on the second wire, it beats at 200 beats per minute, which is really fast. And I remember playing basketball games in high school at a heart rate of 200 a minute, just thinking I must be out of shape or something. And I could sort of do it, but it was a little weird. Anyways, that kept going on, and eventually I had an episode on a camping trip where I almost died, and that got my wife to say, you need to go to a cardiologist, which I never had. And they basically just lasered the wire, and then it was done. So that was, in a way, it got me more interested in the heart, because that was my only medical problem. But it doesn't have a whole lot to do with what I found or the issues that I raise in the book.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And tell me, who's this book for, really?
Well, I was telling this story yesterday. When I was in medical school, we, of course, had anatomy. And anatomy, just where things are in the body, doesn't factor into much about medicine, right? You don't need to know where a spleen is to give somebody an antibiotic or give them a vaccine or anything like that. So I remember a guy in my medical school class who apparently wasn't doing well in anatomy asked the anatomy professor, "Why do we have to take anatomy? It doesn't have anything to do with, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. I don't need to know where somebody's, whatever is." And the anatomy guy looked at him and said, "I think your patients will want to know that you know where their heart is." So the reason I say that is the people who should read this book are people who have a heart. So if you don't have a heart, I wouldn't bother. And anyways, most of the people that I've met who don't have a heart don't do much reading anyways, because they're like dead or they never were alive. But if you have a heart and you're interested in how you function and also keeping your heart healthy so you don't go on to have heart attacks and congestive heart failure, you should read this book. I mean, of course, I would say that. But the problem here is, if you ask 100 medical doctors, why does somebody have a heart attack? So now we're talking conventional cardiologists, right? The guys who give people statin drugs and internists and the cardiac surgeons and the guys who put in stents. They all will say, you have an artery that gets blocked with plaque, the blood can't get through, and then downstream you have a heart attack. Now, if you go and ask, because there's a lot of unconventional or holistic cardiologists, and you ask them, why do people have heart attacks? They say the exact same thing. You get a blocked artery, a blockage in your artery, the blood can't get through, and then you have a heart attack. Now, they disagree about the cause of the blockage. The conventional cardiologists say it's LDL, which is a kind of cholesterol, and you have too much cholesterol blocking your artery. And the holistic doctors, cardiologists say, no, it's not just LDL, it's overall diet and stress and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, they all agree that it's the blocked arteries. And some of them have different techniques of unblocking, whether chelation or surgery or whatever. And then out of that 100 or maybe 1,000 or maybe 1,000,000, you have me, and I'm not the only one, but who says, no, that's wrong. That whole blocked artery thing is so obviously wrong. And that's why neither of them actually can figure out how to help people not have heart disease, heart attacks, because they're trying to fix your car without knowing what a motor is, and it doesn't work.
Will this book be for doctors then, or people who work with people with their health, helping them to get better?
Yes, like I often say these days, it turns out for most doctors and scientists are more or less scientifically illiterate, and they don't know how to examine a problem and come to an independent conclusion. Neither did I from school, right? I didn't learn that in school. They don't even know, like, just as an example, and I don't want to give too much away, but if you say the sole cause of people having a heart attack is blocked arteries, right? You would think that at some point in your medical education, you would ask the professor, can you show me an article where they did autopsies on people who died of a heart attack, right? So those are the worst heart attacks. People were okay, they had a heart attack and then they died. And show me that 100% of them have the artery leading to that part of their heart is blocked with plaque, right? That should be the case. So I never heard of any study like that. I didn't know whether anybody even did a study like that. I went through, all the medical training, just like everybody else. And I knew all the stuff that everybody knew. Nobody ever asked that question. So when I was doing the research for this book, I decided to look up every study that had ever been done since the 1940s when they started doing this, because the cardiologists then didn't believe in the blocked artery theory. They said, that's not right. That's not what happens. So they did autopsies on people who died to see if it was true, right? That's how you would know. And I found, 5 or 6 studies that were well done. And the range of people the range of percentage of blocked arteries was, the highest was 78%, and the lowest was 18%, which means somewhere between 82% and 22% of people who drop dead from a heart attack have no blockage in the artery leading to that part of their heart. Now, I subsequently found the best study ever done, a guy named Giorgio Baroldi. He looked at this for 40 years, did thousands of autopsies on people who died of heart attacks, and he said it's 41%. And of those, he could prove that half of the artery blockages came after the heart attack, not before. So we're talking about 18 or so, in that case, 20% of the people even had a blockage. Now, that doesn't mean it caused the heart attack. It just means they had a blockage. 80% had no blockage when they had the heart attack that killed them. Now, if you just apply simple logic, you would have to conclude that proves that blocked arteries are not the sole cause of heart attacks, period. Because 80% of the people don't even have a blocked artery, let alone show that it actually caused the heart attack. So to me, that disproves that theory. Now, if you're a medical doctor and you want to know whether that theory that you've been basing your career on your whole life is true or not, then I think you should read this book.
And you were a doctor, right? Once.
I mean, I still officially am. Yes, I went to medical school, did training, worked as the ER doctor in a big hospital, and had a family medicine practice for 35 years, and licensed by the state medical board, the whole bit. I am not unfamiliar with how we're meant to think. I mean, I just would say that, in 2018, for the first time, so again, not to give away the whole thing, but if blocked arteries were the sole cause of heart attacks, stents should work. You put a stent in, you unblock it, then that solves the problem. Officially, in cardiology, you're not allowed to tell a person, if we put a stent in, this will prevent further heart attacks, because that's been disproven. They're not allowed to say this will help you live longer, because that's been disproven. They were allowed to say until 2018, you will have less chest pain. But in 2018, they published a study in The Lancet where they, for the first time, compared people who had chest pain, and they put a stent in, and then half the people, so the same, 1/2 stent, 1/2, they did the catheterization. They told them they put a stent in, but they didn't. They just pulled the catheter out, didn't do anything. 8 weeks later, they had the same amount of chest pain. I remember the headlines from the New York Times, which mostly doesn't get anything right, but occasionally, even a blind squirrel gets an acorn, as they say. They ran the headline, "Stents Proven Useless." Right? $50 billion a year in American hospitals putting in stents, and all the research says they don't improve your life, how long you live. They don't prevent further heart attacks. They don't even reduce chest pain compared to a placebo surgery. They have no use. And yet it didn't change how they do it. They do the same now as they did in 2017.
And do you think it will ever change? Do you think your research, your theories will ever bring some light to the cardiology?
So I always tell people when they ask, do you think my theory will change things? I don't have a theory. I investigated the claim that blocked arteries cause heart attacks. And like I said, if you find it in 18% of the cases where you have a heart attack, that disproves the claim that the only reason you have a heart attack is blocked arteries. It's like if you claim that all swans are white and you find a black swan, you've disproven the claim. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have or what you think or whatever, it's not true. For me, when I have something like that, I adjust what I think, right? Just like if somebody says there's only white swans and somebody shows me a black and they didn't paint it or something, I just don't think that anymore. Now, the question is, will conventional cardiology? No, they won't change. But what might happen is the people will say, I don't think this makes any sense. And besides that, I don't want to take blood thinners every year that give me strokes and make me bleed in my bowels and feel terrible and poison my liver. So I'm going to look and see if there's any other way of understanding this.
Well, you are changing your patient's life, right? You treat them. You use the methods from the book, right? And the medicine,
Strophanthus,
I'm not
yeah.
going to say, but you've
I
mentioned,
learned about a amazing medicine, otherwise called Strophanthus gratis, which the native Africans called the gift from paradise. And this medicine is, there's other things, reasons people have heart problems and food, and they're not out in the sun and they don't connect to the earth and they are lonely and depressed and sad and angry and a whole lot of other things. But there is a medicine that can help them. And I described this in the book. And it's been known for 100 years that this is basically the nature's gift to people with, what we call heart disease, otherwise heart attacks and chest pain. And, I've treated thousands of people over the years. And I mean, it's the best medicine for heart problems and other things that I've ever seen.
And what about the emotional aspect? Because you state in the book, it's not just a physical. Whatever happens to your heart, with your heart, it has a lot to do with emotions, with your life, with what's happening in your life. Do you still ask the question when the client, the patient comes to you? Do you still ask them what has happened in your life recently?
Right. So I don't actually do medicine anymore. I decided that was enough of that. But we did start an online clinic called the New Biology Clinic, where we have right now 6 trained medical doctors, and they essentially use the method that I worked on my career. And fundamentally, we don't believe in diagnosis anymore. We believe in stories. And not only that, we believe that the things we call diseases or the symptoms we have are not actually diseases. They're the body's strategy of communicating with you and the strategy of making you well. And the best way to describe that is I tell people, so let's say you got a splinter in your finger, right? What happens next? You get pus and redness and pain and swelling, right? That's what happens. So then I ask people, is the pain in the pus, is that a disease, like we're told an infection? Or is that the body's way of getting the splinter out? And most people will say that's the body's way of getting the splinter out. And when it works and it gets the splinter out, then the whole thing goes away. So what about if you breathe debris in your lungs, like cigarette smoke, and you breathe that in, and what happens next? Those are like splinters. And then your body starts coughing and getting mucus and making you rest and fever to liquefy it. And that's called bronchitis. And you go to the medical doctor and he gives you medicine to stop the cough. In other words, keep the splinter in your body. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should help the person get the splinter out and help the cough, and that will restore you to health. There's a whole lot of different kinds of splinters. And there's, every so-called disease has its own story, and every person has their own story. And some people might, develop pain because they're lonely and scared, and that stimulates a whole series of, nervous system reactions, which actually are the root cause of why people get heart attacks. Another person, it's bad diet. Another person, it's they don't move right, or they never move. Everybody has a different story, and it's just superficial medicine to ignore all that makes up a human being, and the way that our bodies communicate to us that they're trying to restore a kind of balance. And so that's what I call the new biology medicine. And as far as I can see, conventional medicine has it all wrong. All they know how to do is your gallbladder isn't right, so we take your gallbladder out. You're coughing, so we stop you coughing. The check engine light comes on your dashboard in your car, so you bash it with a sledgehammer and then the engine light goes off, right? That's how they think. And that's why we have the sickest people in the world. I don't know about Poland, but they probably have a lot of sick people there too.
Yeah, but Polish people are questioning a lot. We don't trust. We have trust issues because of our history, the wars and everything. So we do question a lot, and that's why we publish books like yours. We're strong, and we avoid some things. Anyway, in your book, there's a part saying how to fix your heart, let's say. There's a part saying how to avoid problems, or make sure you don't get any heart diseases, heart issues. And there's this part that it's about a cosmic heart. Do you want to say anything about that?
All I'll say is we are a microcosm of the universe. Now, the question how the universe is constructed is a pretty complicated question. And so I had some ideas back then which correlated what was happening in our heart with the wider world outside us. I think the point I was making is the human being is fit into the cosmos, and we are a reflection of that. But the details of that are tricky. So I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. The next question might be a bit unusual, because you state in the book that the external world affects our hearts. Do you have any comments on what is really happening, with the cosmos at the moment, with the sun, with all the electromagnetic storms on the sun? If you do have any comments on that, could you share this with us, because this might be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we have an idea of what the sun is and where it is and all that, and I think that needs to be re-examined. And as best I can see, the sun is a frequency generator. The interesting thing is when you read the book and you see how it is that the blood moves in the body, it has to do with what's called the anomalous properties of water, and how the frequencies that we're bathed in from the sun and from the earth and from other factors around us and from man-made factors like EMFs and all that. You can model the movement of the blood by putting a beaker of water and then suspending a horizontal tube in it, right? So a beaker of water, horizontal tube. You can measure the velocity of the blood through the tube under various conditions. And it's because when blood interacts with a hydrophilic surface in a tube, like a capillary or like a protein, it creates this gel-like negatively charged state. Now, when you shine the sun on it, it moves faster because there's certain frequencies of the sun which improve the ability of your body to organize the water, to make it more coherent and to make it charged. If you put the beaker of water on the earth, it increases the velocity of the water, because the earth has its own magnetic or electromagnetic field, which helps stimulate, it helps create this gel-like water in us that moves the blood. You put your hands on the beaker, so-called laying on of hands, and which has been an old treatment for lots of things, and it stimulates the movement of the blood, increases this velocity of the blood, of the water in the tube. And as I say, you put your dog next to it, at least most dogs, and it increases the velocity of the water in the tube. And it's the same with us. If you get out in the sun, you get better circulation. You put your feet on the earth, you get better movement of the blood. And then you put your cell phone next to the beaker and the water stops moving. Why is that? Because cell phones emit electromagnetic frequencies which break down the coherence and therefore the charge of the water in the tube or in the beaker or in your body. Now, that's where it gets interesting, because if you go back to the conventional medicine, you say, you know, I wonder whether basically living beings, including us, were fundamentally electromagnetic beings, not material beings, right? We're electrical beings. We have a charge, and when the charge goes out, we're dead. And when your charge is low, you have disease. You ask a conventional doctor that, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just woo-woo conspiracy nonsense. Okay. How do you know whether somebody's heart is functioning well? Well, you do an EKG. What are you measuring? The electrical activity of the heart. And the electrical activity goes down, the heart is sick. Wait a minute. I thought you just told me that we're not electrical beings. Well, yeah. So what about the brain? How do you measure that the brain is functioning? Well, you do an EEG. What are you measuring? The electrical activity of your brain. And if you've got no electrical activity in your brain, you're dead. I thought you told me that we're not electrical beings, or EMGs, measuring in the nerves and muscles. So we are electrical beings. That the charge comes from the interaction of the water in us with the sunlight and the earth and other humans and plants and animals and bees and etc. And it's degraded by man-made frequencies because they're too intense and they're not broad enough. They have to be not broad because that's how they work, right? You can't just have a signal of all different signals and expect your cell phone to work. It's got to be a specific frequency. And we're not used to being exposed to high intensity single frequency emissions. And your heart in particular creates the electromagnetic toroidal field around your body. You know, that's the basis of our life. I will say one thing, just to this question about the cosmic connection. There's interesting meaning hidden in words. You can often tell where things come from based on what are called anagrams, which is rearranging the letters in a word. So you can rearrange the letters of the heart and you get earth. And you also get ether, which is the electromagnetic field that we're embedded in. The heart is related to the earth, which is our home.
But you said that when you're exposed to the sun, it does make a difference in terms of healthy heart. So it is connected to the sun in some sense, and it is connected to the earth.
Yes. The sun and the earth form a sort of battery. And people know this. You see, people know, when do you feel the best? When I go for a walk on the beach by the ocean with bare feet, right? That's when you feel the best. And also the salt water, the electrolytes or the minerals in the water, they help, you can't create an electrical charge with distilled water. You have to have minerals in it. And those are the ions that create the electrical charge. So the best thing for your heart is walking barefoot with somebody you love on the beach in the sunlight. The worst thing is being on a computer like this.
Yeah, but you can find a balance, like few hours on computer and then 10 hours outside barefoot, right?
Right. That's what I do after I do interviews, is go to my garden and walk barefoot.
Exactly. I live in the mountains, so I have like 5 minutes. I'm going into the woods every day for a few hours.
Yeah.
So when I don't work, I'm connected
Yeah.
to other world than we're used to as people.
Yeah, I mean, and people are really getting into this and talking about it, forest bathing, and instead of sending children to school, which is the worst thing you can do, they're sending them to forest places, and they just live, hang out in the forest and find animals and build forts and play and climb. And that's I think, one of the ways the world is transitioning, which is, it's a good thing.
He also stated in this book, if the heart is not a pump, what is it really, and what's the role of our heart? Do you still stand by it?
Yes, the heart is a pump, means a pressure propulsion device, meaning it's the squeezing of the muscle that pushes the blood around the body. And that cannot be. I mean, there's 10,000 miles of blood vessels. You can't get a 1-pound organ to push sticky fluid around 10,000 miles of tubes and have it stop halfway in the middle and then get going again and think that that's because of the push from behind. That's magical thinking.
When you read it, it sounds great. It feels great. It makes sense as we're definitely connected in so many ways. We are microcosmoses. That's why I still would like you to answer the question: do you follow what's going on right now with the storms on the sun and planets changing and Aquarius era or things like that? Are you familiar with things like that at all?
I am definitely familiar, and I think some of it is probably accurate and some of it is misunderstood. And I'm not an expert enough to go into the details as to like a careful explanation of which parts exactly are incorrect and not. But I don't think our cosmology is where it should be.
You're being very mysterious. Can you tell more about that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into it so much because I'm not, it's not my, I know only enough to be dangerous. So it's I have more claims to look into and verify, and I'd rather just say I don't know and be in that place of I'm looking into it rather than prematurely say something that turns out to be wrong.
I respect that, especially that it's not your field. So
Yeah. No.
sorry for pushing you.
Okay.
But it's something that Polish people that are opening their eyes right now here in our country are
Yeah,
interested
totally.
in very
It's
much.
fascinating stuff to look into. Who are we and why did we get here and how does this all work? Absolutely.
Okay, so in your book, you also mention love aspect that doctors not necessarily are on the same page with. Um, what what is your position right now? What do you think? How do you feel about this part of the book?
I don't know if you call it a gift because it could be a curse, but what I do in life, I'm very like realistic or well, some people might not agree with that, but literal is in a way. So so here's how I would describe that. So in conventional medicine and science, what the medicine that I learned, and we are told that we are made of physical substance, which is made of atoms. Now, never mind that nobody has ever seen an atom, and the proof that an atom actually exists is very wonky pseudoscience. But anyways, so we're made of atoms and they're formed into molecules, and everything that happens to us is a result of this random knocking together of molecules. And so your thoughts are just nerve impulses of different neurotransmitters, and because the neurotransmitters which are certain chemicals, they go in a certain pathway, you think such and such. And because you have certain hormones or oxytocin, you experience the phenomena we call love or connection with another person. And then they claim that obviously the heart has something to do with this phenomena of love. So you get a heart surgeon, and I remember, asking one years ago, do you love your wife with all your heart? Yes. If you dissect your heart, because you think everything is physical, right? Yes. You would therefore find the love in there. Somewhere there'd be this molecule or this chemical called love. No, that's ridiculous. So, in other words, on the one hand, you say that everything is chemical, but there is no chemical called love. Therefore, there can't be any phenomena called love. Here, give me your wife's phone number. I'm going to call her up and say, you don't actually love her with all your heart. You love her with your nose or your left index finger or something, right? So it's ridiculous, right? The whole theory of the biochemical phenomena of life is actually ridiculous. Now, once you get away from that and say, it's like, does matter create consciousness or, emotions, thinking, etc., or does consciousness create the physical structure? That's like the age-old question. And clearly the evidence to me is that consciousness and emotions and thinking actually are the origin of physical substance. They're all different frequencies. And the frequency of love, meaning connection with another person or animal or plant or mountain or something, is a creative impulse. And it actually helps to literally create the formation of your heart. Now, how that works, I have no idea. I don't know how, frequencies become physical. I just don't know that. And I don't know anybody who does. But that seems to be what's happened, because the other way doesn't work. Substances don't think. They can't get them to feel anything. And by the way, they don't evolve either. That whole theory of evolution is a crock. That's a whole nother story.
You've published some other book lately, Common Sense Child Rearing, right?
Yeah, it's my thoughts.
Do you want to say anything about that? Yeah. Do you want to talk about this book
it's
for a
just
little
my
while?
thoughts of, almost 70 years of being a father and a grandfather and treating thousands of pediatric children, patients, having them work with me in the garden, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we need to change how we treat children, and especially this business of school, which is how you create people who don't think, which is the whole point of school. And so I basically wrote a book describing what I think about children, who they are, and how we should try to work with them. It's a good book. I like it.
Before we finish, I have one more question. Do you think that there will be more people getting heart diseases and heart issues if they follow, the mainstream and, the lifestyle that is very common at the moment?
Yeah, it's already happening. It's been happening for 100 years. I mean, it's so interesting. You get these cardiologists who for years been saying eat low-fat diets, it prevents heart disease, right? If you go back and say, what was the incidence of heart disease in United States in 1920? 0. They didn't have heart disease. They all say that. So what did they eat? Butter, cream, eggs, lard, that sort of stuff. So how do those two things make sense? In other words, the very time in history where people were thinking, butter and cream were health foods, there was no heart disease. And you're telling me that the way to have no heart disease is to not eat butter and cream. I jokingly, because I like to joke a lot, I said one of the jobs of a medical doctor is to describe new diseases. And I actually described a hitherto unknown disease. It's called the syndrome of insufficient thinking, otherwise known as SIT. And the people who have this syndrome, you describe as being full of SIT. And they hear things like this and it doesn't register, right? They hear, when you tell somebody to eat this, they don't have heart disease, and they still think that's the syndrome of insufficient thinking. Undereducated, overschooled. Or like my favorite author, a guy named Ivan Illich, said, the purpose of school is so that people who do well in school get the dubious privilege of being able to consume more school until they've consumed so much school that the only people they can talk to are people who've consumed a similar amount of school. That's a cardiologist. The only person he can talk to is a fellow consumer of school called another cardiologist. Anybody else he can't talk to because they don't understand what he's talking about. So they have their secret codes and languages.
Here in Poland, are a lot of people who are waking up at the moment, and I myself know a few people who recently have gone to medical school, not because they want to get dumb. They want to get some knowledge, but most of all be able to work with patients. But their minds are open, and I'm sure they will love your book, and they will love
Yeah.
the interview, this conversation we're having, because they're open-minded, and they're getting as much knowledge as they can from all the sources possible to then follow their hearts.
Yeah.
And
That's good.
I'm happy. I'm happy there are people like that who just don't give up. Like, oh yeah, this is system. We're not gonna do anything there. It's pointless. They go in and they change it from the inside.
Yeah. It's good.
So I will
Tell them to
recommend this
read my
book to
book.
them.
And if they want to ask me anything, they can contact me and I'll help them out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, for this conversation, and we're very excited having this book on board
Great.
that we just published 2 weeks ago, and I've read it in the last few days, and I'm very inspired, but also feel safer with all the things I've been doing for the last couple of years. Now it makes sense. I feel better and I'm healthier.
Good.
So thank you so much for this book, for this interview, and we're hoping to see you soon, to see you again, to maybe publish another book, and to be in touch with you.
Great. Well, keep in touch and see what we can do here.
Exactly. All the best, Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.